welcome back. If you're new, thanks for joining. I've got another worm update video, and I have 4 bins that I'm going to be updating and 1 harvesting. So this is the first of my regular tote, and this one was just restarted last week. So there is a lot of cardboard material in here. Not a lot that you can see that the worms have done because it's still all new bedding. So looking at these, again, I'm starting to look at trying to maintain moisture levels. It is the summertime, humidity is in full effect here in New Jersey, and one of the things that these regular totes do is hold on to water, especially the ones that I have, since I don't have any holes at the bottom. So I originally had put the lids back on to these bins when I restarted them, but I immediately switched over to using the mosquito screen because I didn't want a lot of moisture and to be held up in the bin. So I do have the mosquito screen back on top. The castings are damp but not too wet still. And since there is so much cardboard in here and materials for the worms to break down, I'm giving this bin a smaller feeding than I normally would. So it's just going to get a couple of pieces of watermelon, a couple of pieces of banana, and that's it. And as per usual, I do add the grit at every feeding for the worms, and I'm going to put the sprouts that came up back. One of the great things about the summertime is that I have sprouts to use in here, as they do come up from the melons, which are plentiful at this time of year. So I'm going to cover this up, and this one is all set for the next week. My second regular tote had some sprouts in there as well, which is a great thing. This one is the one that tends to run a bit wetter. Got a little worm friend there, looking healthy, looking good, always great to see them. And this one has a cocoon stuck to the side of it, but it's a cocoon where I believe that the worm has already hatched out of, so I'm not concerned that that one has one on its back, and of course it'll come off. But I'm just taking all the sprouts out of here, and again gonna inspect what's going on in the bin, but not much you can see is taking place. The worms are moving through the castings. They move from one side to the other, but it's still more bedding than anything else. And I do want to make sure that I get all the way to the bottom. I am using a gentle hand when turning this over. I'm not trying to damage or harm any of the worms that are in here, but I do want to get all the way to the bottom to make sure that the wetter material doesn't stay at the bottom and then hold at the bottom and cause a muddy situation. But again, the dampness in this bin did lead to a lot more sprouts coming up, so I have a lot more material to work with for food for the worms. And just like its sister bin, I am collecting the sprouts in any pieces, and then I'm going to use that to pad for food for the week. And this one as well, since I do have a lot of cardboard, I am not going to put a lot of food into this bin. I'm just going to use what's here in my hand as the basis for the feeding. Then of course, after I do give it food, I am going to give it grit, and that updates this one. Again, not a lot to see with the bins once they've been restarted. I'm only updating one of the existing VermiTotes, and this is the one that was recently restarted. And just like the regular totes that I have, this one is mostly the material. Now, the VermiBag Tote does run drier than the other ones, so I was kind of shocked to find that this was as damp as it was in there. But again, I do believe it has to do with the weather itself. The room where my worms are had been pretty humid in there, and a lot hotter, so I think that contributed to what I was feeling with the materials in the bin. But otherwise, I'm not too concerned just yet. It's not super damp, not super dry. The worms are moving throughout. So with this one as well, I'm going to give it a little bit larger of a feeding with more food that has a higher moisture content than the regular totes, and that's because for the most part, a VermiBag tote does run on the drier side. But the worms look good, so just going to feed it up, give it its grit, and that will update this bin for the next week. Moving over to the VermiBag Mini, my one and only flow-through system, I noticed one of the worms on here moving, and you can see the clitellum. The worm is actually moving backwards, and I thought something was wrong with the worm. So I was focusing on that because I'd never seen a worm do that in the bubble wrap, and I just thought it was pretty cool. But the VermiBag Mini, in this one, the material, the level of it is going down again, and I'm working on bringing that level back up. I did take a break from adding cardboard because the edges were drying out more than I liked, so I didn't want to continue to add dry material while I was still trying to balance the level of moisture. So I'm definitely going to add some material to it this week. And I'm going to give this one a good size feeding of some frozen bananas and watermelon as well. I can feed the VermiBag Mini a lot more material than I can any of the other bags because it's set up to allow for the moisture to wick out of it pretty well, which is why the edges stay as dry as they do. But overall, worms look good. Health of the bin looks good, so I'm just going to add the layer of grit, then add a layer of cardboard to this, wet down the cardboard so that I can keep the moisture level relatively okay, and then this one will be set up for another week. The good thing about it to note also is that I don't see a lot of beetles. Usually around the summer is when I find a lot of beetles in my bins, especially the VermiBag Mini. So far, I'm managing to keep the number of beetles down for a pretty long period of time, which I find is a success for me. So again, my main focus with the Mini is just like all the other ones, make sure that the moisture content remains at a balance point. So it's harvest time for the second VermiBag Tote bin that I have, and I'm going to do this as a bait tray. So I'm just going to dump all of the material out. I'm going to also do a quick sift through the material to make sure there aren't any large chunks of food left in there. That way, the only food source is the food in the bait tray, which will force the worms to go into the bait tray itself. So that's what I'm doing right now, just making sure there aren't any leftover scraps or anything to entice them to stay in the castings. The castings themselves do feel really good, and they aren't too dry at all. And I'm filling this bait tray up with some bananas, things that the worms really like, and then I'm going to cover it with cardboard. I do like covering it with extra bedding. That way I don't lose castings by trying to cover the top to keep it dark for the worms, and that way when I dump it, it's just adding more bedding to the new bin. So once I've fed it up and I've covered it, I'm going to set it aside for a couple of days. I do like to harvest it about a day sooner than I do feed the other bins to make sure that there's still a lot of food material in there and that the worms don't try to migrate back out. But this is starting the harvest period for this last bin all over again. After finishing with the castings, I just put some new bedding in the bag, no food, and that finishes the update for the final bin. Thanks for sticking to the end. Please like and subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching.